Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio Sport News. He writes that there's 8 coaches already on the hot seat. Brett Brown's name not on that list. You would be probably feeling different if you were reading my Twitter timeline. Mitch, how are you, pal?
Should I have put Brett Brown on there? Maybe. I actually heard last season there were points where the buzz around the league was, Brett Brown's not long for that job, and they're going to blow him out, and they're going to try to get X, Y, or Z. And then I was told by people, who knew, everything's fine. But, a loss like yesterday, and I'm not saying he deserves to be on the hot seat, but that is just, what did Joel Embiid say or Brett say? It was unacceptable.
Yep, unacceptable.
Halloween, I wasted a good Halloween going over to Brooklyn, like nobody else was in the building, to watch the Nets play Detroit. The Nets are bad. They don't have much talent. Kind of feel bad for Kenny Atkinson, who's trying to do a good job with that team and develop players. They're still paying for that hideous trade they made with the Celtics years ago. They're up against it. They don't have, they haven't drafted. They don't have great draft picks. No free agent in my mind's going to Brooklyn. And when I saw this score yesterday of the Sixer game, I figured the Sixers sent their G League team. I mean, 27 turnovers, and you got bombed in Brooklyn. And I know they don't win on the road. But
28 turnovers.
28. I don't want to short them.
Don't shortchange them.
I was also, there's everybody's alarmed about the Sixers start. The worst thing that might have happened to them was playing Miami in the first round last year. If they had played at Boston in the first round or a team like that, instead of playing like a 44-win team with no stars, they never would have gotten out of the first round. And they wouldn't have all these expectations. But, they got a lot of problems right now. It's not the same team as it was last spring. It's like Joel Embiid is half clown, half basketball player. He loves to go off on Instagram. He loves to kill Andre Drummond. I mean, that first game in Detroit where Blake Griffin killed him for 50 points, and all he can talk about after the game is how I own real estate in Andre Drummond's head. Dude, your team just got beat by a guy who scored 50 points. So, Brett Brown's got there's a lot of problems down there.
Yeah, and look, he got hired by Hinkie. They bring in Colangelo. Now they're on brand. It seemingly he has a lot of say there. So I can't imagine that would be an issue there. The one issue is the roster construction of this team. When you look at it, Mitch, it looks like for all that Embiid, has this to say, that to say, he looks like he has developed his game and added to it. How about Ben Simmons? When you watch him, what's the bugaboo about the league about him?
Again, just doesn't shoot, can't shoot. And the big thing is, when is he going to become, when is he going to develop his shooting? How many years is that going to take? Here's a guy who's played limited basketball when you look at his resume, so he's got a lot of work to do. And then, a lot of people are, we're all trying to figure out faults and what's not just in terms of his, when he's going to put his skills to use, but what's going on between his ears and all that stuff. So, the key components of this team are all guys who have been anointed stars, especially Embiid and Simmons, and they still have a ways to go. And the thing about Brett, you got to realize this too. There's the ownership group there meddles, and they dictated what happened. That trade that they made around the draft, where they traded Bridges off and they got Zaire Smith and they got the number 1 pick. Brett Brown didn't want to do that. That was done by the owners. They wanted to do that because they had in their minds that they could take that number 1 pick that they got from Phoenix and turn that into Kawhi Leonard in a package. The only problem was the Spurs wanted a guy who could score 25 points a night. So Philly didn't have that. That's why they went to Toronto and they got DeRozan. So although Elton Brand's in place and Brett has power, there are guys above them who are also very involved. And that sometimes can get a little dicey.
No question. Well, this whole thing has turned into a dicey situation because who knows where it was supposed to go, and now you got 3 different philosophies and trains of thought trying to put this team together, and it looks like a very flawed roster. You mentioned Fultz and that whole situation. He's been coming along. I guess he doesn't look like a number 1 overall pick. And then last night, that shot he takes, and then Hanlon comes out on Twitter, then he deletes it saying, well, he's not healthy still. This whole thing has turned into a bizarre situation.
And the thing that's the worst thing about Fultz is Jayson Tatum. Right?
Well, absolutely.
That's the thing. See, now I don't know what they're thinking about where you are and in Philadelphia, but when people talk about Fultz, the number 1 thing, the number 1 default thing is, oh, yeah, well, Danny Ainge, he fleeced him. He got Jayson Tatum and a pick out of that deal. Unfortunately for Philadelphia, because the way Fultz is playing, or just in general, in the world of basketball, when people talk about Fultz, they go automatically to, boy, you see how great Jayson Tatum is? Philly could have had him.
That's question.
A problem.
No
That's
question.
That's a big issue. That's a hurdle that young man might have to overcome, because he might be thinking about that too. I mean, Jayson Tatum, you've seen him play.
Yeah.
And you see how we just walked into the NBA, and he became a guy who, like, man, this guy is going to, wow, what a ceiling he's going to. And meanwhile, who the guy they trade? Oh, yeah, that Fultz guy in Philadelphia. He's all screwed up. I'm telling you what. I was in Dallas a long time ago.
Uh-huh.
The Mavericks had a chance to take Karl Malone, who was dying to play in Dallas, coming out of Louisiana Tech. And Red Auerbach started to tell people around the league, this Detlef Schrempf kid, he's got some Larry Bird in him. The Mavericks took Detlef Schrempf at 8, passed over Karl Malone, who went, I think, 13 to Utah. Okay? And all Detlef Schrempf heard about from people in Dallas during his first few years was, you're not as good as Karl Malone. I'm telling you, this reminds me, this Fultz Tatum thing, and it's even worse because this is the number 1 overall pick. Look, we'll see how it plays out. Hopefully he'll get his game together, get his act together. But as long as Jayson Tatum is producing from Boston, that comparison is always going to be made.
Sure. And look, I mean, it's one thing if they reached on Fultz. A lot of people thought this guy was the best player, right? I mean, coming out of that draft, a lot of people thought this guy was the best player.
A lot of people thought this is perfect for Philadelphia. He's going to be the scorer that they need. He can score from all areas of the floor. He can take the ball. You know, Ben Simmons is just a pass first. He can't even shoot. He doesn't even look for a shoot for a shot. This guy can do that. So, yes. But, you know, nobody knew that there would be these problems last year with this mysterious injury and whatever happened and whatever's going on now. He's, 19, 20 years old. That's the thing, too. I mean, all these guys, and I mentioned it before, it's worth repeating. Embiid, limited resume. I know he just, gave himself the Congressional Medal of Freedom for playing his first 100 games in the NBA. He hasn't played much basketball. Ben Simmons hasn't played a lot of basketball. Fultz hasn't played a lot of basketball. Now they're in, now they're all looked at, especially the first two guys. Well, these guys are stars of the NBA. They're going up against better players. They've got higher ceilings. But they're going up against guys who have accomplished more in the NBA, and that's the problem.
Well, and I think one of the big disconnects is because they did what they did. Now that they have talent, people demand that talent delivers immediately. When I don't think it's fair to assume that this team is going to be ready immediately. You got to say, look, okay, they had the talent, but you got to give them 4 to 6 years before you can legitimately think, yeah, they're going to be good enough to get by you in a playoff series because they're so young. Even though they're talented, they got to go through the bumps and bruises.
And you know what? It goes back to they beat a Miami team last year. They won 44 games, and it's starless. It's the perfect. I remember saying to myself, this is perfect for Embiid and Simmons to play in their first time in the playoffs because Miami's got no stars.
Right.
They're not going to beat them. They're not going to win a game or two against Philadelphia because Miami does it on. They're trying to develop players. They've overpaid a bunch of guys. They won 44 games in a bad conference because they're well coached. But in terms of star power, in terms of guys who are going to be all NBA players, are going to be MVP players, Miami doesn't even have all-star players. And that really, in the long run, works against Philadelphia now because now this year, I forgot the over-under, but it was like 54 or 55 games. And coming in this year, I figured, they might take a step back. I actually have Milwaukee because of the Budenholzer hire and because of Giannis. I had them rated as the third team in Philadelphia 4. I might even be wrong on Indiana. They might be better than Philadelphia. Philadelphia might be the fifth best team.
Yeah, I like Indiana coming into the year. I actually like Toronto. What do you think of the Toronto-Boston at the top right now?
Well, Toronto's renting Kawhi Leonard. This is a one-year deal. And people are going to say, well, Paul George. Paul George to me, I mean, look, he was sending signals he wanted to go to Lakers, so I can't account for why he didn't go there except I don't think he wanted to deal with the pressure of going into a place and being expected to win with the banners. But I think Kawhi Leonard, from everything I hear, he's ticketed for the Clippers, okay? So it's a one-year proposition for Toronto. This year, they could have the best team in the East. We'll see. I mean, they've gotten off to this historic start for their franchise. You see what they did to the Lakers last night? I know the Lakers on the back end of back-to-back. Without Kawhi, they're up 41-10 in the first quarter. So Toronto's going to be very good.
They're good, man.
They're very good. Nick Nurse is, he's a free. We'll see what he does, though. In the crucible of the playoffs, how he performs. Also, as the first-time head coach in the NBA. My team is, though, the team I picked was Boston, because as long as Kyrie's healthy and their depth and their, the guys like Tatum and Kyrie, and we'll see how Gordon Hayward does. I don't think anybody. To me, they should walk off with the East, especially in the playoffs. And, we'll see. I mean, Look, they're not playing great either. I mean, the game against Indiana the other day where Kyrie blows that layup in the last, 20, 15 seconds, they would have put the game away, and then they lost on an Oladipo 3, and then Oladipo stole the ball. That was a bad loss
good.
For Boston. Oladipo's very good. I mean, and here's the thing about Oladipo. He keeps getting better. He's already looks like he's better than he was last year, and he's embraced his role. He wanted to take over a team. He wanted to, we all thought, this guy did nothing in Orlando or Oklahoma City. What makes him think that he could take over and become the face of a team? He's done it so far in Indiana. Now, he doesn't have the ceiling of Embiid and Simmons, to me. His ceiling, to me, is he's an all-star, borderline all-NBA, all right, third-team all-NBA guy. These other guys from Philadelphia, especially Embiid, you're talking about guys who, if they develop and stay healthy, they could be MVP candidates in the future. Oladipo's not going to be like that, but still, they've come together very nicely for Nate McMillan. And, out in Milwaukee, this Budenholzer hire was a great hire for them. They got a lot better on the coaching lines. He's much better than Jason Kidd. They're already better defensively. That's where he makes his mark, Mike Budenholzer, besides being offensively. And I just figured, with Giannis, he'll probably take the extra step and take more steps on his way. He had a tough series last year against Boston. That Game 7, when I watched that game, he did nothing in Game 7 until late. He finished up with a decent line, but at the start of the game, he didn't do anything, and he didn't impose his will. So he's got some growth to do, but Philadelphia is going to be a good team.
Milwaukee, you're saying, going to be a good team.
Milwaukee.
And look, we're talking with Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM, NBA Radio, Sporting News. Check out his column on the coaches on the hot seat. We'll get to that in a minute. Jimmy Butler. He might play a big factor in the East if one of these teams can get out there and figure out a way to get him.
Well, it's funny. There's this thought out there that we know Miami's interested, and Tom Thibodeau wants nothing off their roster, and we know Houston's interested because Houston, that's just their nature. And by the way, Houston they're getting their defensive coordinator back, Jeff Bezdilik. That's got to help something. He was there last couple of years. That defense will be helped a little bit by that. Still some personnel issues there. But, everybody now is thinking Philadelphia will be one of the surprise teams that comes out of left field to go in and try to get Jimmy Butler. And they've probably got more assets than these other teams. So we'll see on that. I heard early on that Philadelphia was leery about bringing Jimmy Butler into that locker room with these young guys, because look what Jimmy Butler has done in Minnesota with Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. That's basically a war zone in that locker room with those guys, and what he did in Chicago. So I don't know. Is Philadelphia going to panic? Are they going to try to do something and get Jimmy Butler, knowing that Jimmy Butler may not stay? I mean, I don't know if Jimmy Butler would just walk out after 1 year. I don't know if he even think, what he would think about a move to Philadelphia. He thinks he's like this LeBron James too, or he's as good as Kobe Bryant. And, I'm going to play when I want to play type of deal. The arrogance just kills you because he's under contract, as we all know, and he's basically trying to force his way out. But Tom Thibodeau is one of these guys. He's not going to take like 30 cents, 40 cents on the dollar because he knows he's got to make the playoffs. It's probably his last year running the show in Minneapolis. He'll probably be gone after this season. So we'll see what other teams show up and try to get Jimmy Butler. You always heard that Dallas might be a place. I don't know what they could give up, probably anything except for Doncic, but they don't, I don't know what Tom Thibodeau, what he wants is he wants established players who can help him in the loss of Jimmy Butler still get to the playoffs. Like from Houston, he doesn't want Marquise Chris and Brandon Knight. He wants guys like Eric Gordon, guys like Tucker, like that. He doesn't want like developing players because Tom's in, as we know, he wants to win tonight's game and tomorrow night's game and win this regular season and get in a higher seed than he was last year and maybe trying to make a move in the playoffs.
All right, so let's start with him. You have him red hot. Could there be a chance that he gets canned before the season's over?
No, I don't think so. I think he'll probably coach the season. But you know what? After the season's over, I just don't think that Glenn Taylor and he are going to get along. I think that there's too many. And you know what? I don't even know if Karl Anthony Towns wants to be coached by Tom Thibodeau. I mean, here's a young player, very immature in a lot of ways, and Tom is very demanding. It's all about winning all these games, and I just don't know. You know, I've heard the name Chauncey Billups, as I threw out there. There's a guy who used to be in the Timberwolf organization, very well thought of, turned down the Cleveland GM job a couple of years ago, and I've heard that, you know, that he would be maybe a potential candidate to run the show, not coach, but run the show. He'd bring in his own coach. But I just don't see Tom lasting beyond this year.
Let's go out to Portland. I found that one to be a little bit of an eyebrow raiser. They're 7-3, off to a decent start, but why Terry Stotts on the list?
Well, you know, you have to remember, and I'm sure you read this too, you have to take into account what's going on in the organization. And in that organization, they were rocked by the death of Paul Allen on the eve of the season. Here's Paul Allen, 65 years old, has more money than anybody, yet that didn't prevent him from, you know, losing his life to cancer, right? And so now there's a big school of thought in the NBA, and even I think the Portland organization. What is the Paul Allen company, Walton, going to do with the team? His sister, who survives him, Jody Allen, she's a big Seattle Seahawks person. She's around the team. She has a presence. The word is she doesn't know anything from the Portland Trailblazers. She's not around. So the word is, and I think some fear too in the Portland organization is, maybe they might get sold. And if they're sold, that's why Terry would probably be a guy. And even Neil Olshey, the GM, I mean, you know, when these teams get sold, you saw it in Philadelphia, you see it anytime a team gets sold, new owners come in, what do? Out goes the old regime in terms of the GMs and the coaches. In comes the new. Terry's a very good coach. Now, Terry went after, my understanding is, and this kind of created some waves in Portland. They didn't know this, but apparently he was interested in that Phoenix opening. Just after this last playoff run, Portland didn't give him permission to talk, and Paul Allen denied him a contract extension. So, we'll see what happens out there. But the big thing is, will this team be sold? And this is a monster thing because Paul Allen owned him for about 30 years.
Let's look at Luke Walton. I know Magic came out. He was on your list. You did this list before Magic came out. You said getting hot, and he said he's not getting fired. Is that just lip service?
Here's the funny thing. You know, I wrote that before anybody knew that Luke was called in on the carpet, and Magic apparently was cursing at him and screaming at him. It's just totally ridiculous. I mean, the Lakers in their first 7-8 games, they got into this brawl. That meant that Rondo was out for a couple of games. That meant that Ingram, they're probably maybe their second best player anyway, depending on what you think. He's out 4 games. The offense, which Magic complained about, is fine. It's playing, they're a top 10 offense in a lot of different categories. It's their defense that's an abomination. So it didn't make any sense. But, anytime LeBron James is on a team, what am I going to do? Assume that Magic Johnson did this on his own volition? I think we all know that LeBron is a guy who works behind the scenes. And as I tweeted, you know what, when the story broke, I was like, when are we going to start hearing that LeBron had absolutely nothing to do with Magic Johnson calling Luke Walton in on the carpet? And, of course, if you noticed, when they beat Portland the other night to break that 16, they had lost like 16 straight games to Portland. What are one of the comments LeBron James says? The coaches did a great job for us. They put us in a position to win. That's like typical LeBron. And I got people, LeBron wouldn't do that. Go check his record in Miami where he tried to get Eric Spoelstra fired. We know what happened in Cleveland with David Blatt. Yeah. This is going to be a season-long distraction. I know Magic came out, Mike, and said, Luke's fine, nothing's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. When LeBron James is on the team, there's a problem. Last year, his big problem was Daddy Ball, right? LeVar Ball. Now his big problem is Daddy Basketball, LeBron James.
I heard Ty Lue is available.
Ty Lue is available.
Yes,
you know what? And guess what? He's a former Laker, if you remember, in the series against Philadelphia where Iverson stepped up. Who did he step over? Ty Lue.
That's right. How is Mike Malone on your list? What did he do wrong?
Nothing yet. Better make the playoffs. That's the word. And you know what?
They're pretty good.
Mike a long time, and they're off to a great start. But Stan Kroenke, who also owns the L.A. Rams and, Stan's this billionaire, they got Mike an extension to start the season. But the word is he's got to make the playoffs. And, this extension is like $5 million, which is a tremendous amount of money, except for a guy like Stan Kroenke, who can write a going-away check very easily. So we'll see. I mean, look, everybody I talked to said, they're going to make the playoffs, no problem. Well, we'll see if they make the playoffs. I mean, here's a team that has to – a lot of guys on that team still have to grow up. And defensively, that's where their shortcomings sometimes are. So we'll see what happens. You know, you can win 48 games in the West and not make the playoffs. That's been done before. So there's a little pressure on Mike there.
They are 8-1, looking good for Denver right now. For Mike, let's see. Another one I was interested in is Jaeger in second. Like, they fought to get him to get there. They're actually playing pretty well. So give me the getting hot on Dave Jaeger.
Well, it goes back to you talk about when you look at teams, like who owns certain teams and what is their reputation and what is their actual, not just reputation, but what's their track record. I mean, we know the story in Sacramento. They go through coaches every couple of years. The new owner, there, Vivek Ranadive, is no longer new. You know, he's had coaching situations and problems. I think the last guy to coach into his third year and beyond was Rick Adelman, and that goes back 8 or 9 coaches. You've had a plethora of guys. So the order from the front office was, got a lot of young talent. You got to push the pace. You got to get up and down the court, which they've been doing, to Dave's credit. But you just wonder, you know, you're in an ownership, you're working for a guy who basically some days they'll just roll out of bed and say, you know what, I feel like firing my coach today. It's not unusual. We have that situation in New York with James Dolan, who can sometimes be a contrarian, but can sometimes have a quick trigger finger. You see that could happen in Phoenix with Robert Sarver, who blew out his GM Ryan McDonough 8-9 days before the season, right after he had hired a new coach and they had drafted 8 and all this stuff. So sometimes you have to look at the owners and say, you know, are these guys like the San Antonio owners or Mickey Harrison in Miami who defer to Pat Riley, and these guys in San Antonio who defer to Greg Popovich, and they don't get involved, or they're owners who meddle, and sometimes for the worse. So yeah, Sacramento's a place you always have to keep your eye on.
Phoenix, they just hired Kukushkov out there.
Right.
He's already on the hot seat?
Well, because he works for Robert Sarver, and, you know, that's the deal. Robert Sarver's a guy, I mean, when he fired his GM, did you think that was a little strange on the eve of the season?
Yeah, that was bizarre.
Basically? Well, he's had bizarre, you know, he's fired a bunch of GMs. He's fired a bunch of coaches in his tenure. And so, look, my basic point on that is we'll see how he does. Look, he's got Booker, okay, he's got Ayton. Those are his 2 best young players. I don't think I'm missing anybody. They don't have a point guard. We know that. That could be a landing spot for John Wall in case Washington ever wants to break that up. But here's the deal: when you're coaching for a guy like Sarver, you always have to, you know, make sure you develop the guy. Make sure you're trying to keep him happy and doing the best you can. And sometimes, you know, let's not forget Kukushkov's a first-year head coach. So we'll see how he does with these guys.
Wizards, you got Brooks on there. Should they break that Wizards team up? Is someone getting traded from that
years?
Team? Yeah, I agree with
you. You can't. To me, now you might have waited too long because John Wall's had another knee surgery last year, and he's going to get this extension, which is going to be mind-boggling when you talk about what he's done versus what they're going to pay him. You know, $40 million a year and all that stuff. But to me, I would have broken that thing up because I don't think you're going anywhere. Really, I don't think you're going to be a championship contender or even going deep in the playoffs with a guy like John Wall. And I like him as a player in some respects, which is a lot of things I don't like about him in terms of, you know, how, you know, defensively he's a disaster, and just the stuff he says, it drives you nuts because he's always pointing a finger. And to me, I don't think, you know, Ted Leonsis is the owner, and Ernie Grunfeld, the GM, are very patient. We know that through the years. They might fire a coach now and then, although, you know, Randy Whitman lasted longer than a lot of people think. I mean, Scott Brooks has a guy, he's got 3 years, $21 million left. I don't know if they're going to actually make that type of a move, but I'm telling you, if you watch that team play and you see they always have internal issues, Mike. They always have chemistry issues with John Wall, whether it's Gortat. I'm sure he will have problems with Dwight Howard before long. That is not a good situation.
It'll be interesting to see which teams have that guy that maybe wasn't in the trade discussion that becomes into it because the teams like Washington. I mean, does Beal get traded off? Does Wall get traded off? Are there guys around the league that we're going to start hearing their name? Who are some interesting – I know we're 10 games in, but the candidates start coming out quick.
Well, you know, Beal is a guy who a lot of people like. You know, and obviously doesn't, you know, I guess he's younger than John Wall. I'm not sure the age is exactly here, but he's a guy who people really like as man. You could see him playing with the Lakers, or you can see him playing with this team, that team. Whereas, you know, Wall, we just went over the litany of kind of the minuses to him, the red flags that come up. In terms of other guys who might be trade candidates, I mean, you know, I haven't really taken a hard look at that 10 games, and I will say this: there's already a lot of buzz about Anthony Davis. When Anthony Davis left his agent to go to LeBron's guys, Clutch Sports,
he says he's staying. You're not buying it?
Well, you know what? Here's the thing. Can I see a scenario where he tells the Pelicans, "I want to be traded to the Lakers"? Yeah, I could see that happening. I don't think it's going to happen today or tomorrow, but could it happen down the road? Absolutely. And that's just something where then you're going to see magical race to get Anthony Davis. The sooner, and I'm sure in his mind, the sooner the better. I'm sure Brandon Ingram and anybody else not named LeBron James will go to New Orleans. But Anthony Davis is the number one guy when it comes to who are these names. And I don't know if it's realistic right now, but, yeah, that's something I think you have to keep in mind for the future.
He's excellent on the NBA, SiriusXM NBA Radio. Give him a listen over there. He writes for the Sporting News and Forbes. You can check out his NBA column at Mitch_Lawrence. He was kind enough to join us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thanks, Mitch.
Enjoyed it, Mike.